This week on Government Matters.
We can choose to make this an area of competition, which I guarantee you we'll win if we have to.
President Obama has a bone to pick with China's President Xi Jinping. The cyber espionage tit for tat. We have an in-depth report.
The Army's gotten this information in the first part of the study now, so they know some of the things that flag soldiers for suicide.
Unlocking soldier suicide. A groundbreaking study using big data helps pinpoint troops at risk, but privacy concerns abound.
That means that the data can't truly be open. It means someone's got to pay in order to use it.
Implementation of the Data Act is well underway, so is the DUNS number a done deal? Government Matters starts right now.
From ABC 7 and News Channel 8, this is Government Matters.
To our viewers around the world on the American Forces Network and here in the nation's capital, thanks for joining us. Government is the engine that runs this city. That's why Government Matters. Every week we'll bring you the top headlines in tech, security, and management. I'm your host, Morris Jones. President Obama and China's President Xi Jinping held bilateral talks this past week. They hosted a joint press conference and broke bread at a formal state dinner. Pomp and circumstance aside, there are serious issues on the table, including cybersecurity. Simon Mosen reports. We can choose to make this an area of competition, which I guarantee you we'll win if we have to.
Not mincing his words, President Obama makes it clear the U.S. won't be victim to cyber espionage. It's top of the agenda when he meets with Chinese President Xi Jinping.
China is a staunch defender of cybersecurity. It is also a victim of hacking. The Chinese government will not, in whatever form, engage in commercial theft or encourage or support such attempts by anyone.
The White House has threatened sanctions against China. A little harsh? Well, some say they've been a long time coming. Last year, the U.S. indicted 5 members of the People's Liberation Army for allegedly pilfering intellectual property from 6 U.S. companies. And in August this year, China was the leading suspect in what's being described as the worst breach of U.S. government-held data. Nearly 22 million people. But is the U.S. being hypocritical?
The United States is one of the best, if not the best, computer network exploitation operators in the world. This has been known and clear for quite a long time, but of course the revelations of Edward Snowden made it incredibly clear how extensive and how sophisticated U.S. cyber intelligence operations were.
So it would seem while classic intelligence gathering for national security purposes is acceptable, there's a crucial difference. China, the US says, is using cyber espionage to steal blueprints and business plans to help state-owned firms gain an unfair competitive advantage. Beyond a commercial threat, experts say China's cyber power is often exaggerated.
The rhetoric often slips into imagining that Chinese spies are planting logic bombs throughout U.S. critical infrastructure and the power grid is about to go down. That is very unlikely.
China and the US aren't alone. Take a look at this, a real-time look at cyber attacks around the world. Experts say Chinese networks themselves are highly insecure and its huge population make it an ideal target. But it's the range of targets and number of cyber attacks coming out of China that is unprecedented.
Simon Mosen reporting. The Obama administration has not publicly blamed China for the OPM data breach, but cybersecurity experts have. Now we're learning the biometric implications are much worse than first thought. Initially, OPM said 1.1 million fingerprints were stolen. OPM revised that figure to 5.6 million, more than 5 times the original estimate. Intelligence agencies call the notion that China has fingerprints on millions of federal security clearance holders troubling. Meanwhile, Apple is dealing with the fallout of a breach of its own. It could expose iPhones and iPads to hackers through hundreds of infected apps. The Intercept reports the malware, called Xcode Ghost, was previously developed by the CIA. Rebecca Jarvis has more.
Introducing.
Just weeks after announcing a brand new iPhone, Apple finds itself in an unfamiliar position. Victims of a large hack that could steal your personal info, including passwords. Cybersecurity firms this morning reporting that a malicious program called Xcode Ghost infiltrated 344 apps in the App Store. The infected apps, primarily used by Chinese consumers, included a chat app, a car-hailing app, and a music app from internet portal NetEase. The hack originated in China, and experts are warning that while your iPad and iPhone are safe for now, the security breach could put Apple at risk for more attacks in the future. Apple released a statement saying, "We've removed the apps from the App Store that we know have been created with this counterfeit software. We are working with developers to make sure they're using the proper version of Xcode to rebuild their apps."
Let's take a look now at the rest of this week's agency headlines. Unless Congress acts, the government will shut down at midnight this coming Wednesday. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says it won't come to that. Allies telegraphed his next move, a temporary funding bill through December 11th. It would not include a provision for Planned Parenthood. Federal News Radio reports the Department of Homeland Security chose Raytheon to work on its Domino program. The contract could be worth up to $1 billion. It will improve intrusion and detection capabilities on the Einstein system. NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, just released a draft framework for cyber physical systems. The goal is to help the private sector design products for the Internet of Things. In tech matters, IT challenges for the Inspector General community. Federal IGs walk a fine line. They report to Congress and the head of their agency. They fight fraud, waste, and abuse and promote effective government operations. But those offices face new challenges like risk-based data analytics, access to data, and information security, according to a new survey conducted by AGA and Carney & Company. It's titled Accelerating Change, the 2015 Inspector General Survey. Joining me with the latest is AGA Technical Director Chris Collins and Peace Corps Inspector General Kathy Buller. Well, Chris, I'd like to start with a trend pinpointed in your survey, the rise of data analytics. It painted a mixed picture. Some IGs had a hard time accessing data stored across different IT systems. Others had great success and wanted to share that information with agency program staff for follow-up. So what are the challenges here? How can IGs improve?
AGA found through our research that this is an issue affecting a number of inspectors general, and through the research and the survey that we did, we believe that there's more clarification that's needed on the matter, and we're interested in supporting that in any way we can with the IG community.
Kathy, let's talk about the role information security plays in your work. The survey finds half of IGs would direct any additional resources to InfoSec audits. The OPM breach focused a lot of attention on this area. How did it impact your priorities?
Information security has always been one of our priorities. If our information isn't accurate, the audits and investigations that we do aren't reliable. So information is very important to us. It's also very important to protect the information of individuals that the government has stored in its systems.
Audits continue to be a point of contention for inspectors general. Here's a quote from this year's survey. In 2015, audit and review requirements associated with the Data Act were added to the recent requirements for conference spending reviews, purchase and travel card audits, and improper payment audits. Fewer resources are available to address important high-risk areas of an agency's operations. Chris, this is a group of officials who should be pretty independent, but they feel shackled to audits. What's the answer here?
Well, it's a difficult question to answer because IGs have essentially two masters that they need to report to. One is the agency head and CFO of the agency they work with, but they also have to report to Congress. So it makes it very difficult when an IG has work that they need to do at a particular agency, but may feel that there are challenges within that agency as far as obtaining the information they need for a particular audit.
Before you go, I'd like to focus on hiring. Half of the people who responded to this survey ranked IT security and IT audit skills as two of the toughest to find. Kathy, why is this such a big problem, and can it be fixed?
Those skills are it's very competitive trying to get those skills, and the federal government has a difficult time gathering them because we can't compete with private industry. And as soon as we get somebody on board, the standards change, technology advances, we can't keep up. In addition, the government hiring practice is extremely cumbersome, and it can be fixed. Hiring practices can be made easier, and it would be easier for us to get the resources we need then.
Chris, a final thought?
I think the main thing that we want to take away from this, from the research that AGA prepared with Carney and Company, is that there's a lot more clarification that's needed, and particularly from Congress. That's what a lot of the IG community is looking for, clarification as far as how to proceed forward.
It's great having you both on the program. AGA Technical Director Chris Collins and Peace Corps Inspector General Kathy Buller. Thanks again to both of you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We'll turn from tech to security straight ahead on Government Matters. Suicide rates in the military are much higher than the civilian population. Now, with the help of big data, Army officials think they know why. We discuss privacy rights and the potential to save lives. Next. In security matters, unlocking soldier suicide. 6 years ago, the Army and the National Institute of Mental Health took on an ambitious project of using big data to identify suicide risk. The project is called STARS, the study to assess risk and resilience in service members. For more, I'm joined by Frank Konkel, technology reporter and events editor for the Government Executive Media Group. Frank, explain the study. What type of information do the Army use, and what are they trying to accomplish?
Okay, thanks for having me, Morris. So the study was a 5-year program, came to fruition in 2009 after a large increase in the number of suicides from soldiers dating back to when troops went overseas for the Afghanistan and Iraq campaigns following September 11th. It came from a $50 million grant, and what the first part of the study did, there's 2 parts, and we'll get to the second part soon, but the first part went through and examined military personnel records, health records, administrative data going back to 2004 for hundreds of thousands of active soldiers to try to figure out what would put soldiers at risk for suicide. So they would see who actually attempted suicide and then try to correlate that data with previous information that the Defense Department and Army had collected over the years.
Now, Frank, there are significant privacy implications here. How will that factor into the Army's use of all this data?
Yeah, there's a lot of big privacy concerns. So the Army's gotten this information in the first part of the study now, so they know some of the things that flag soldiers for suicide. But what the next step is figure out how to ethically use that data. So let's say that you and I were up for the same position in the Army, and that the data sets that they had on me said that I was a risk for suicide. That could be used negligently, or some could say unethically, to hold me from getting a position that I may or may not deserve, right? So it wouldn't be based on just your records then, but all these other data sets that you may or may not be able to even control. So that's one question that has to be answered. And then there's another too, as the Army looks to downsize, and we know it's going to do that because of budget costs and whatnot. Would you want to get rid of some of these folks that pose a higher flag or risk factor in suicide? And that's of course, that could be argued as a no-no. And some of the guys that I've interviewed for this piece argued just that, including the data scientists that helped author it.
They're certainly in a predicament. The same model that helps to identify soldiers at risk for suicide also helps to identify soldiers at risk for accidental death or serious injury. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so once they put a lot of these data sets together, and we're talking a massive amount of data, we're talking hundreds of terabytes of data. Just for context, the entire printed Library of Congress would be about 10 terabytes. So this is like 10 to 20 times more than that information. Once they put that together, they found a lot of these flag factors. Well, the same factors that would lead someone to potentially attempt suicide also suggest they may be at high risk for accidental deaths. So we're talking training exercises, things like that, drunk driving accidents on or near military bases, and other adverse behaviors. So it doesn't come as a huge shock if you think about it, though, because if you may or may not value your own life highly, it may lead you to do more risky behavior with others, people that are in your units, that type of thing.
Now, there are a lot of data points that went into this analysis. I'm curious about two in particular. How do stop-loss orders and multiple deployments impact suicide risk?
That's a great question. So stop-loss orders, just for people who don't know, that's when you're on a deployment, you're an active soldier, and they extend your deployment. They kind of tell you at the last minute, hey, you're going to be doing this for another 9 months or something like that. And then multiple deployments for years, for many years. In fact, people would testify from the Army in front of Congress and try to figure out what in the world was causing these, this increased suicide rate. Well, multiple deployments were just thought to cause more trauma in soldiers who go overseas. Naturally, one would think, you know, okay, if I'm on a second or third tour of duty, I might have seen more bad experiences, that type of thing. But in fact, this data suggested that the individuals who go on multiple tours of duty don't see an increase in suicide risk, which is kind of counterintuitive to the sort of myth that was propagated over the years. So that was a big piece of information. The same fact held true for stop-loss orders. We thought that people who were sort of told at the last minute, hey, you're going to be staying over here for an extended period of time in a war zone, we thought that that would increase the risk, and it was normal to think that, but in fact that's not the case at all. And over the years, the highest increase in suicide risk among soldiers has actually been soldiers who weren't deployed at all.
Well, it's all important information. I'm glad you brought this to light. Frank Konkel, technology reporter and events editor for the Government Executive Media Group. Thanks again, Frank.
Thanks, Morris.
We'll turn from security to management straight ahead on Government Matters. The Data Act and financial transparency legislation have focused a lot of attention on who owns Uncle Sam's digital diary. The future of DUNS, next. In Management Matters, Data Transparency 2015. Some of the top minds in open data convened in Washington, D.C. this past week to discuss data publication, data analytics, and data reporting. It's a pivotal time for transparency in federal spending as the Obama administration implements one law and Congress considers another. For more, I'm joined by Hudson Hollister, Executive Director of the Data Transparency Coalition. Hudson, let's start with the Data Act. Earlier this month, the Office of Management and Budget finalized standards. Now, federal agencies will start to incorporate them into financial systems. Generally speaking, how will that work?
Well, we're optimistic, Morris, that it's on track, at least with regard to the information agencies have to report. OMB and Treasury have agreed on the government-wide data fields that will govern reporting by agencies across the entire executive branch. That means for the first time, it'll become possible for the public, for CFOs, for other managers to visualize spending, all its different components, accounts, payments, budgets, grants, contracts, all as one whole. The data standards will bring that together for the first time. The deadline for agencies to begin reporting is May 2017.
Let's drill down on one aspect of those standards. OMB decided to stick with the DUNS number, a system owned by Dun & Bradstreet. You've been critical of the DUNS system and favor an alternative called a legal entity identifier. Why?
Well, because, Morris, whenever any data standard is owned by someone, when there is a contractor that itself has a proprietary interest in a format or in a data element, that means that the data can't truly be open. It means someone's got to pay in order to use it. It means the government must pay for a license. It means that if anybody outside the government wants to use the data, they also must pay. And that prevents the basic public interest from being served.
We reached out to OMB for comment on their decision to stick with the DUNS number. They didn't respond in time for this interview. Regardless of the reasoning, it will be hard for agencies to reverse course once they implement all 57 data standards into their financial systems. Is the DUNS number a done deal?
No, it's not a done deal. OMB, aside from agreeing to use the DUNS number for now, also committed to set up a process to reevaluate what data formats and what data standards should be used in federal spending in the future. And we'll be participating in that process. We are awaiting the details of that, but we do think that the public interest of having a data standard nobody owns that allows the data to be freely reused, ultimately that'll prove compelling.
Hudson, you're also tracking a piece of legislation in Congress called the Financial Transparency Act of 2015. What is it and where does it stand today?
Well, Morris, if the Data Act transforms federal spending in the way it's reported, the Financial Transparency Act will transform financial regulation and the way that it's reported. The 8 different agencies that are considered financial regulators, as you might guess, they use completely different formats and different standards to collect all of that information under the securities laws, the commodities laws, the Banking Act. If we had consistent data standards, then investors would have better access to information, the agencies themselves could use analytics to find the next Enron, and the companies that must report, the banks, the financial firms, they could report automatically. Data standards and financial regulation are good for everybody, and that's what the Financial Transparency Act, which was introduced by Congressman Issa and 11 other co-sponsors in May, would do.
Now, in May, we spoke to Rich Wilkinson at Neo Systems Corporation, one of the government's top accounting firms. Here's what he had to say.
I think what's being done is a really good idea. They just need to make it work. Getting them to agree on data standards in the kind of time period this bill's talking about, you're looking at a 2-year clock. That's pretty daunting.
All right, Hudson, has there been any talk of relaxing that time period, or is it full steam ahead?
Well, that's a matter for the different negotiators in the Financial Services Committee on the House side and the Banking Committee on the Senate side to decide on. But what's encouraging is that everyone seems to agree that if all these different agencies are collecting information from the financial industry, they should use consistent data formats to do it.
You hosted the 3rd annual Data Transparency Gathering in Washington a few days ago. What's on the horizon for data transparency in the coming months?
The thing that makes us the most excited is that there is a growing constituency that sees the connection between these changes in federal spending that the Data Act requires and the changes in financial regulatory reporting that the Financial Transparency Act requires. These are different areas, they're different professions even, but the technological change that these policy changes are hitting on is the same.
It's always good to have you on the show. Hudson Hollister, Executive Director of the Data Transparency Coalition.
Thanks very much.
And that's the latest from Washington. Thanks for watching. I'm Morris Jones. We know your week is filled with other matters. Save this half hour for us.